That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a special episode of Crash the Canvas. I'm your host, David Mitchell, aka Dirty Mitch. And by way I mean special. This is going to be the first part of our top 5 series, where I go top 5 into things like top 5 entrance songs, top 5 factions, top 5 tag teams, top 5 rivalries, etc., etc. You get the picture. But I'm going to start it off today, the very first one, with the top 5 announcers of all time, in my opinion. Now, mind you, anything I say on this is totally opinion based, and it's of my own opinion and my own gathering of the love of professional wrestling and what it's meant to me, and things it's done for me in my life and how it's entertained me. Before we keep going any further, I want to remind you to follow. You can reach me. You can email me at dirtymitch417@yahoo.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at showmestategoon. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe. And like I said, we'll keep this top 5 series going. We'll peddle a few products later on of a few friends of mine. And as always, tune into Busted Open Radio on Sirius XM Satellite Radio, channel 156, Monday through Saturday. And then download the app on your phone and get the app and get the Masters Class series. You want to hear some guys talk about wrestling stories and things about wrestling, pro wrestling. Man, you don't want to miss the Masters Class. But anyway, let me get into my top 5 ring announcers. What I mean by ring announcers, I mean by lead analysts, lead guys, right? And, for every antagonist, you need a protagonist, in my opinion. And there's no better protagonist than the guys you'll hear on that I'll name on this list. Now, in my opinion, as a wrestling fan, this is one of those lists, and in about 10 years or so, we can revisit this and probably add 3, maybe 4 names, in my opinion, and you can shuffle the top 5 around. But as it stands, to me, as a wrestling fan of over 45 years, spanning from the 70s all the way into the 2020s, these 5 right here, cover the entire timeline there. And, so without further ado, also, what makes a good lead announcer important? Here we go with these difficulties here, but what makes a good lead announcer great is their art of storytelling. And it's not just saying, he whips him into the rope, what a maneuver, or, he does this and he does that, awesome body slam, listen to the crowd. No. To me, a good wrestling announcer, a good commentator, is someone that, like, if you're listening to a football game on the radio, right? More importantly, a high school football game on the radio. And if it's if the person calling that game, just like the person calling that match, you can't see, if on the radio, you can't see what they're seeing. So it's up to them to articulate it, correct? To make you feel like you actually visualize that running back, barreling down the field and breaking tackle and moving this way and that way, right? To me, with a wrestling commentator and a wrestling announcer, the knack of the storytelling, to where if I am in the other room, right, and say for instance, for whatever reason, it's I don't know, say a Monday Night Raw or a pay-per-view or a Dynamite, whatever it is, if I can go in the other room, right, and all I'm hearing is that person talking, and I can visualize exactly what's going on based on that person's ability to tell a story, that's what makes a good announcer or a commentator, in my opinion, when it comes to pro wrestling. I might be wrong. That's just my opinion. Like I said, I've been watching professional wrestling, sports entertainment, whatever form of the entertainment of the art that you want to call it, for since 1979, right? So, not saying I'm an expert, but I've heard the good, the bad, and the worst. And so, without further ado, we're going to start with number 5 on my list. That's number 5, right, on my list. And that is the late, great Gorilla Monsoon. Yeah. Now, why some of you guys might be like, wow, if Gorilla's number 5, I can't wait to see who 4 through 1 is. But like I said, this is one of those lists. If you're doing it now and you're just considering the 5 of the last, say, 40, 50, 60 years, these 5 stand out, right? So it's not a matter of how would you say, the order of importance, so to speak, is on the beholder. If you got these 5 in your 5, then you're doing somewhere. But Gorilla Monsoon, right? He passed away in 1999 at the age of 62 of diabetes. Man, you think about the WWF, right? I'm talking the rock and wrestling era, right? The WrestleMania era, right? He was the voice. Part of the thing is he worked for Vince Sr., right? And he owned shares in WWF, right? So when Vince Jr. was buying it from his dad, he bought Gorilla Monsoon's shares from him with the promise and preface of a lifetime employment. So he was kind of like Vince Jr., Vince VKM's early Pat Patterson, so to speak, the confidant that Pat Patterson became later on. That was Gorilla Monsoon in the beginning. But the staging area is called the Gorilla position after the late Gorilla Monsoon, because that's where he used to sit as an agent and a producer and as an executive, so he could watch the talent. He could be the last one to speak to them on their way out and the first one to speak to them on their way in. Kind of notice it once Vince Jr. stepped away from commentating and was in the back full time, that's where he sat. But he was the lead commentator for the first 8 WrestleManias, 5 of which he did with Jesse the Body Ventura, right? He was his most memorable pairing, though, outside. Well, you could give it to Jesse Ventura, but you could also give it to, people would argue his most memorable pairing was with Bobby the Brain Heenan, whom he was paired with in about mid-1990. And they did the old Primetime Wrestling, right, which was the preface to what later became Monday Night Raw. And I think he did a couple Monday Night Raw episodes. I'm not sure on that. I think by the time Raw came around, he was more of a, he took over the Jack Tunney role as president of the World Wrestling Federation, right? Here's a little known fact, right? In the pre-WrestleMania days, is he was a co-host of Georgia Championship Wrestling during the Black Saturday era, when Vince McMahon Jr. had bought control of Georgia Championship Wrestling and was airing WWF product on TBS, which if you guys know the history of the WCW versus WWE saga, that was the seed to the rivalry right there. Also, which later became, allowed Vince in a buyout to fund WrestleMania, and the rest is history on that. So and one of the more memorable things that Gorilla Monsoon, if you give it one-liners or whatever, catchphrases, if you will, because he really didn't have none, but he didn't need none, because he just, his voice and the way he talked just commanded your attention. But it's been immortalized, it's used all the time, and it was actually referred to in a I think a Tom Brady versus Patrick Mahomes. It might have been Brady versus Peyton Manning, but WrestleMania 3, Hogan versus Andre is their going to the middle of the ring to, and Gorilla utters the phrase, the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, right? That was coined forever at that point. So at number 5, I got Gorilla Monsoon, right? It's when you see the top 4, you'll understand, right? At number 4, I have what many call the GOAT, or the GOAT, next to someone that's going to be later on this top 5. But Gordon Solie, the Professor, right? Gordon passed away in 2000 at the age of 71. You speak to Jim Ross about who was one of his biggest influences in the wrestling business as a commentator, and he'll tell you Gordon Solie. Gordon Solie began working in Championship Wrestling from Florida for Eddie Graham and Don Curtis, ring announcing for $5 a night, and he worked after that. Got him a job, got him hooked on, got him a gig through various promotions in Georgia, Alabama, and Puerto Rico. So, he was over there working for the Colognes and in Puerto Rico. He also did work for voiceovers later on in the 80s for the late Antonio Inoki for New Japan Pro Wrestling. Kind of what Jim Ross does now, or was doing. Let's see. He's been considered the Walter Cronkite of pro wrestling, right? He had all kinds of catchphrases. They say, he's been credited with coining the phrase Pier 6 Brawl, or he's wearing a crimson mask, right? Or he would always end a broadcast from wherever he was working, whether it be Florida, Georgia, or who he was working for. When he was working for the Crockett's and the National Wrestling Alliance, he would always end the broadcast with, like, say for instance, when he was doing Georgia, so long from the Peach State, Florida, so long from the Sunshine State. When he was doing stuff in Missouri for Sam Munchnick and Central States, he would be like, so long from the Show Me State, right? Those were Gordon Solie moments, and he just had kind of a raspy voice. I can't do a Gordon Solie impersonation, and, wouldn't want to. He was one of the first ring announcers I ever heard on TV. I got introduced to professional wrestling in 1979 by my grandfathers and my dad. My parents were just recently divorced, and at that time, Central States Wrestling, Sam Munchnick, Joe Blanchard, cooperating with the traveling NWA champion, who at that time was none other than Kansas City's own Harley Race. And, so I got introduced then. I got introduced not long after that on TV to, I believe it was either Georgia, it might have been Georgia Championship Wrestling, right? But the commentator was Gordon Solie, right? And he also was, transformed with the Crockett's when they, became the sole proprietor, so to speak, of, he also did some work for World Class. I do remember around the David Crockett Memorial time, or not the David Crockett, excuse me, the David Von Erich tribute show. Him doing some maybe vignette. I think I recall doing him doing vignette interviews for World Class at that time. But he did some voiceovers about Dusty Rhodes. The Dusty Rhodes, right? I would dare say he was a catalyst in speaking on the birth of the Dusty Rhodes Ric Flair. I mean, I think he called the first Starrcade, or it might have been the Flair. He called a lot of those important matches of the Jim Crockett Mid-Atlantic area. He retired in 1995. Last appearing, I believe it was at Slamboree, right? And but will forever be considered, one of the GOATs. And like I said, top 5 definitely. Top 3, arguably. Top 2, arguably, right? It's just in the eye of the beholder. And it's me, like I said, when you see the end of the list, you'll understand why. And when I tell you, when I mentioned how long I've been watching pro wrestling, you'll understand why. So let's move on to number 3, shall we? Now, this is going to surprise a lot of people. It's going to surprise a lot of people just because maybe not so much that he's on the list, but where I've got him on the list, and that's Joey Styles. Yes, Joey Styles of ECW. Oh my God! Yeah, that Joey Styles. The reason why I put him number 1 in the top 5, but just as high as Gordon Solie and Gorilla Monsoon, is think about what he's done, what he did in ECW. We're just going to talk about, ECW run would have got him on this list regardless, right, in my opinion. But I hate to use the word low budget, but as cost cutting as ECW was, Joey Styles was it. And what I mean by it, Joey Styles didn't have a backup chair, right? Didn't have a sidekick. He didn't have a Jerry Lawler or a Bobby Heenan. No disrespect to those guys, right? He didn't have a Corey Graves to Michael Cole, right? So he didn't have a backstage interviewer. He had nothing. He did it all himself. Everything from in-ring interviews, backstage interviews, promos, vignettes, color commentary, pay-per-view, right? He is still the first and only announcer to ever call a live pay-per-view solo, right? And he did this for the entire run of ECW, from the very first show till the show went bankrupt. Now at the end, right at the end, right after I believe they went on TNN, and I believe this was more of probably a network decision. He had Joel Gertner, who was an awesome guy, awesome to listen to. He had Joel Gertner with him on TNN. He had Rick Rude doing hardcore TV with him. And then Cyrus, who is Don Callis, doing pay-per-views with him. But Joey Styles, and then, what was epic was when they did the ECW One Night Stand in 2005. It was almost like if Joey Styles was not... Yeah, I get it. They put Mick Foley with him just because that's Vince's, that's got to be his little imprint on it. It's not going to be 100% old school ECW, but we're going to give you as much as you can. But anything other than Joey Styles on the commentary wouldn't have meant nothing, right? And then the way he quit, they said work, shoot, work. It doesn't matter. That was still good television, compelling television. So number 3 on the list is Joey Styles, right? Real quickly, I want to give a couple people a shout out. Like I said, I want to give Busted Open on Sirius XM satellite radio channel 156 a big shout out. to all those guys. Dave LaGreca just signed a new 3-year deal, so we got 3 more years of LaGreca shit. Yes, my Monday through Saturday is complete, right? But check those guys out. Monday through Saturday, man. You got Dave LaGreca, you got Hall of Famers Bully Ray and Mark Henry, future Hall of Famers Thunder Rosa, Mickie James and Tommy Dreamer, your current AEW Women's World Champion Thunder Rosa. You got the hottest segment on Fridays with Gabby AF. But man, Dave's got some hot sauce out there. Check out LaGrecasRage.com. That's LaGrecasRage.com. And pick you up a couple bottles. You can get a bottle signed and one unsigned, and put one up on the man cave, on the mantle. Also, man, if you're into coffee like I am, man, go check out richportcoffee.com, and in the drop down box search Hardcore Cafe, and grab you a couple bags of that hardcore coffee from Tommy Dreamer. You can get it already ground up or in beans, but check that out. It's at richportcoffee.com. Also, give a big special shout out to my good friend Angie Pratt at Promise Printing by Angie. You can find her on Facebook at Promise Printing by Angie. She can do anything screen printing. She can make tumblers, shirts, apparel. Man, give them a shout out. Anything you need, inbox or messenger. She'll get right back to you. Work out a price, work out a delivery. She does everything in-house by herself, ships it out herself. I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't believe in the product. She's been timely on everything. But check her out, Promise Printing by Angie. Check her out on Facebook. Now, on to number 2 on the list, right? Now, you got to be thinking, well, who is it? Who could it be? Right? So, this goes down to my childhood, right? Number 2 on my list is Tony Schiavone. And, for a lot of people that grew up in the 80s era, that coveted time slot daddy on WTBS, God rest your soul, Dream. Tony Schiavone was the voice. Tony Schiavone was the voice of WTBS, right? When the Crockett's took over after Vince sold Georgia Championship Wrestling back to the Crockett's, or back to the stock shareholders, or however the story went. You can check that out on Peacock, on the network. But he was the voice. He was the voice from then. He was the voice all the way through. Now, he did have a run in WWE. He had a hiccup run there. I call it a hiccup run because he was kind of a fish out of water, so to speak. Even though he will say leaving the WWE was probably not a good career move at the time. But to us wrestling fans, Tony Schiavone belonged down in Georgia, right? Just like, later on, Jim Ross belonged to WWE, even though that's not where he got his start, right? Even though he traveled through the WCW machine. But Tony Schiavone, started for him in 1983. Tony Schiavone is currently employed by AEW. Still does some side work, I believe, for MLW. He's worked in TNA, WWE, WCW, right? Which was and the NWA, which, like I said, WCW. He worked the very first Nitro and the very last Nitro, right? He will forever be, I guess, how would you say, blackballed. That's just how I'm going to call it. Tony Schiavone deserves to be in the WWE Hall of Fame, but he's not. And I think he's being blackballed for one incident, which took place January 4th, 1999, with the Mick Foley incident, right? Now, anybody that knows anything about the Monday Night Wars knows that in those days when it was, trying to keep the people, on the product, Eric Bischoff would do, those shitty tactics because at that time, Raw, which is all they had, and I don't think I think WCW did have Thunder, maybe, or maybe not yet when this incident happened. I don't recall. But Bischoff would give away the results to the taped Nitro, or to the taped Monday Night Raw. If Raw was taped, right? Don't know where he was getting the results, but he was getting them. He would, blurt out, "Hey." Usually he did it himself. I don't recall him having other people do that up until this point. But when this particular incident happened, he was already on the on-screen character of Eazy-E of the NWO. But he had Tony Schiavone give away the finish of The Rock versus Mick Foley, Mankind, on Raw for the WWE Championship. Now, mind you, this is right about the time. This was the time just before you had already had The Rock become WWE Champion at Survivor Series. You had already had the Rock Bottom in Your House pay-per-view, right? You had already this was pre-Royal Rumble, right? So you hadn't had the I Quit match yet, right? Where you put the belt on Foley. You hadn't had halftime heat yet. Anyway, so they they put the belt on Foley for the storyline, and Tony Schiavone was ordered through the headset by Eric Bischoff to give away the finish. Right? And then Tony uttered the comment, "Well, that'll put a lot of butts in the seats." Right? And it was said that at that moment, right? That moment, 600,000 households reportedly changed the channel and immediately went to the USA Network. And it was almost like the seismic shift in the Monday Night War had finally rested on the WWE, right? To where they were going to, this was the not the nail in the coffin, but this is where the Titanic had broken in half, right? And now one half is bobbing and the other half's going to start sinking soon, right? This was that moment, right? But he should be in the Hall of Fame. And if you don't know wrestling, I will say this. If you don't know wrestling, then just say you don't. But to say that this man doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame when every bad thing that you could do to Vince McMahon personally, those people that you would thought would have been blackballed are in there. You can hold him up for money, right? Refuse to go out on a major pay-per-view and hold him up for money and still be inducted to the Hall of Fame. You can testify against him in court and still be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Right? You can do all kinds of stuff, but you could do the immortal sin of throwing the championship belt in the trash on the competitor's show and still be in the Hall of Fame. But how dare you be the announcer, right, that gives away the finish, that makes the people turn to your product, right? You should be kind of throwing roses at his feet, so to speak, because of that. But he's not in your Hall of Fame, right? But you know what? You ask Tony, and it's, I guess smoke and mirrors, apples and oranges. On a side note, he's also done pretty well for himself. He was the voice of the Gwinnett Braves. That's a minor league team of the Atlanta Braves. And he also did work for the Georgia Bulldogs. I don't know if it was just baseball or entire athletic department, but yeah, Tony Schiavone. And here's also a fan note, so to speak. Two things, actually, when it comes to me. I have a good friend in radio that got me my first job in radio, Jason Marks. Well, when he left here in Wichita, and he went back to the Atlanta area, I forget the name of the station, so I don't want to give him the wrong shout out. But he went to work for this radio station. It was a sports station, obviously. And Tony Schiavone started doing I don't know if it's a weekly, daily, whatever, but he started doing a show, right? Jason messages me and says, "Man, you won't believe, what I'm doing and who I'm doing for, yada, yada, yada." Because he's just as big a wrestling fan as me. And I was like, wow. He's like, "Yeah, first episode's today," And so I messaged him back, said, "Man, that'd be pretty cool about if I could call in and ask him a question." And he's like, he gave me the number. Anyway, I was Tony Schiavone's first call on this show. And I asked him about the Hall of Fame. And he, gave the respectful answer. If it's meant to happen, it'll happen. He's not going to lose sleep over it. It doesn't change his career. Being in the Hall of Fame doesn't make or break his career. Much respect to him for that. But, which leads me to number one on this list. And if you don't know, you should know, right? And that is none other than Boomer Sooner himself, Jim Ross, right? Jim Ross is number one on my top 5 announcers. And there's no argument why. I mean, this man debuted in 1974. And if you watched his Hall of Fame speech in 2006, he gave, he's done it all from setting up the ring to being a referee to driving around, legendary promoters like Leroy McGirt or, and those stories are legendary. Leroy McGirt getting sent, going to go kill the $1 Million Man, and I believe it's Shreveport. That was a heck of a story to hear. But Jim Ross is the storyteller of all storytellers, in my opinion, when it comes to pro wrestling, because he would get to know the talent. I've heard it time and time again, over and over, right? And all in a good way, right? All in a good way. That the best way for Jim Ross to call your match is for him to get to know you. If you're not, kind of touching base with him, and it had nothing, when it come to WWE wise, it had zero to do with his role as talent relations or whatever, or vice president of talent relations. Had nothing to do with that, right? He had an uncanny ability to tell a story about a person just by getting to know them, right? With his own verbiage, right? That he came up with himself. I mean, like, think of all the catchphrases. It's a slobber knocker, or it's getting beat like a government mule, or stomp a mud hole in him and walk it dry, or here's one where he says, looks like a damn car wreck, or it looks like Muskogee on a Saturday night, right? But when I started at the beginning of this, and I was saying about being able to tell a story, being able to sit there and close your eyes, right, and just hear, and by the way of their words and their storytelling, you can feel like you're visualizing it, right? Or, like I gave the analogy earlier, if I've got it on the television, right? And it doesn't matter what I'm watching, but I've got wrestling on. If I'm off in the other room and I've got it turned up to where I can hear it, a good announcer, in my opinion, a legendary one, or a great storyteller, I will be able to visualize what's happening in that ring or what's happening on that television set without even looking at it, because of the way they use their words, right? run down some of the stuff where Jim's worked. He's currently employed at AEW, obviously. Got to start, Mid-South, Bill Watts, Universal Wrestling Federation. I remember as a kid getting introduced to Jim Ross and seeing him in one of my first few times I ever got to meet wrestlers or see them, not in the ring, behind the scenes, so to speak, when I kind of snuck off where I wasn't supposed to be. But we'll save that for another episode, another like a story time type episode. But excuse me, he was the voice and called every major moment of the Attitude Era, right? From the Austin McMahon rivalry, from the rival Monday Night Wars with WCW, to the Ruthless Aggression era and the brand split. If you think about that, he also, unfortunately, was dubbed with the dubious distinction of having to keep his composure and let the wrestling world know that Owen Hart had died. Live on the air, he had to do that, and still go out there and work. You can't speak about wrestling since 1990 to now without thinking about Jim Ross. He's an accomplished author, got the JR's barbecue sauce, does the podcast thing. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in, I believe it was 2006. But I'm going to leave you with something. This is what I mean by Jim Ross. And when I hear this, I still get goosebumps because, like I said, he has a uncanny ability to describe something and tell a story and make a blind person visualize it. And when you can do that, you separate yourself from the rest, right? But let me see if I can pull this up and get it to play. And it still gives me goosebumps. This is courtesy of the Peacock, WWE Network on Peacock. This is the closing moments of No Way Out 2003 from the Bell Center in Montreal. The return of Stone Cold Steve Austin after his infamous walkout, right? You got to go watch the beginning of this, but to get the full feel of it, the end of it is what really gives me the chills and the goosebumps, especially when Jim Ross says, there's 18,000 when Jerry Lawler and Jonathan Coachman go to get him, says something about him needing to sit down, or he should sit down, right? And he said there's 18,000 standing. Why the hell can't I, right? Let me see if I can go ahead and get this to play. Hold on. Okay. Bear with me just a second. I don't have no... Yeah, here we go. Hold on. Now, let me turn that music up and see if y'all can hear this now.
And I missed that mean streak, didn't you, JR? You damn right. And some of these fans...
Now, just listen to this and listen to Jim Ross's passion.
Austin is as nasty and as evil as any human being. Salute! Oh, big one! Big one! Will it be? Yes, it is! Yeah! Stone Cold! Here is Stone Cold! You talk about an ass slipper! You talk about a Texas-sized ass slipper! Stone Cold! Stone Cold! All right there! Stone Cold! Okay. It would take Bishop not just we deserve the son of a bitch! Man, that Texas rattlesnake is back! The Texas rattlesnake is back, King!
I do. King, we're not going to get him to sit down.
He got exactly what he deserved. I don't think I've ever heard or seen anything like this. This is a moment, ladies and gentlemen. This is a moment. Feel it. Look at it. Experience it. That's right, Stone Cold. Look around.
Man. Let me compose myself for a second. That was 19. Come February, that was 20 years ago, right? And that still gives me goosebumps. Anytime you can invoke your passion to invoke a reaction from somebody, especially 20 years later, you gotta be number one. Ever get a chance to meet Jim Ross? I want to play that clip for him, just that small little part. And I want him to watch the goosebumps that stand up on my arms and tears that kind of start to well up in my eyes, right? To let him realize the total impact he's had on me. Not just me, but there's, countless and thousands of others, that feel that way about Jim Ross, right? And, it is, that sign right there is the sound that we are about out of time. I want to thank you guys for joining this special episode of Crash the Canvas of the Top 5 series. Once again, I've been your host, David Mitchell, a.k.a. Dirty Mitch. Again, you can find me you can email me, dirtymitch417@yahoo.com, or you can find me on Twitter at ShowMeStateGoon. Like I said, again, shout out to Busted Open Radio and Dave LaGreca, new 3-year deal, more LaGreca shit. Shout out to Promise Prince by Angie. You guys have been wonderful. You've been great. Stay safe. God bless you guys. And if you're going to crash the canvas. I'm out.